And are there any questions from the audience at this time? Thank you. Okay, this question seems to be directed to you, Karen. It says, can you talk about the decisions to open or refurbish a school as a driver for redevelopment or as a barrier to recovery for certain neighborhoods?
Well, post-Katrina, some schools simply did not reopen. While the Recovery School District took over, I think, 107 schools, they did not reopen 107 schools. In some neighborhoods, schools were rebuilt, and in other neighborhoods, schools have been slow to come back. One neighborhood comes to mind, and that's over by the former Desire Housing Project in the 9th Ward of New Orleans. Carver High School opened up, I think it was in late 2007, in trailers. And right now, here we are, 2015, they're finally building the building. But if we knew we were going to open a school up in an area where there used to be a housing development, the housing development came back several years ago. There's no elementary school in that community. The high school is just now under construction. And if you come to New Orleans, I'll take you over there. You should see that neighborhood. It looks like a bomb went off in that community. And so if the redevelopment of the community had been done hand in hand with the redevelopment of schools in that neighborhood, it could have had a different effect to help spur the development of that neighborhood, and it didn't happen. But if you go into some other neighborhoods like Lakeview, and even in my neighborhood in Gentilly, where we got schools back quickly, and you could see, even though we had 10 feet of water, you could see the housing rebuilt in that neighborhood. In Lakeview, which had even more water, they got their one elementary school back, and children in that neighborhood get a right to go to that school. They get a choice to go to that school before they have to choose other schools. Lakeview is one of the most white areas of the city. I think it's only 3% African American. And kids have a right to go to that school. And it's a thriving community. It has, banks and restaurants and coffee shops and drugstores and grocery stores, all those things you need for a community. But when you go over by the old Desire neighborhood, you don't see any of that stuff. And you don't see an elementary school at all. And finally, after 10 years, you see a high school under construction.
Thank you, Karen. Next question seems to be directed to you, Doug. It says, please describe more about not using the NAEP scores to draw inferences for Louisiana when New Orleans students account for such a large percentage of test takers in the state.
Well, it's not that large. I mean, it's not even the largest district in the state at this point. Jefferson, I think, is largest. And there are, 58 districts?
Yeah.
So I guess it's just a small percentage. I'm not sure what else to say. I don't know what the exact percentage is, but it's so low that I don't think the NAEP scores can tell you anything. I mean, and it's unfortunate because I think part of the issue here is with the high-stakes scores, you have this potential for teaching to the test and things that are not reflecting real learning, and the NAEP is a potential way of seeing around that, but we just can't do it.
Okay, this one I guess can go to any one of the panelists. What do you think, what do you think the federal government could have done to promote equity and responsibility in schools after Hurricane Katrina? Anyone of the panelists can take us?
I'll just start by saying that, I'll begin by saying immediately after, at the time of Hurricane Katrina, Louisiana already had 2 laws on its books. One of them pertained to the charter schools, that any district could start a charter school, anybody could apply, and for a charter to be a charter operator. And the second one concerned the development of a state district called the Recovery School District, into which failing schools were placed after they were failing for 4 consecutive years. So immediately after and at that time, a failing school was defined in Louisiana as a school that was in the bottom quartile. Say its performance score had to be below 60. So at the time of Hurricane Katrina, when Hurricane Katrina hit, and we had, say, 120 schools, All right, at the time Hurricane Katrina hit, the number of schools with their performance score below 60 were 80 schools. There were 80 schools with a performance score below 60. Therefore, they were identified as failing schools, and they could go into the state's recovery school district. But within the 6 weeks after Katrina, when all of us were wherever we were, not in the city, living wherever we could be living, the legislature took it upon itself to write Act 35, which became a law. And in 6 weeks after the hurricane, they redefined what a charter school, what a failing school was, and it allowed the state to take over more schools than had been that they could have taken over at the time of Hurricane Katrina. And a failing school's new definition by Act 35, that's what Act 35 is, the infamous Act 35, is a failing school became a school that had a performance score below the state average, which at that time, the state average performance score was 87.4. So any school with a performance score below 87.4 was a failing school. Now, why all of that means 50% of the schools in Louisiana were failing and 50 weren't. We all know the bell-shaped curve. So why 50% of the schools didn't get placed into the recovery school district? Because the second part of the law, which was consistent with the law before, was that you had to be a failing school in a district that had the majority of failing schools for 4 consecutive years. Now, there actually was one other school district that fit that definition that was one of the east or west, I think it was West Feliciana. But West Feliciana only had 4 schools in the whole school district, so I guess they weren't really interested. And the most incredulous thing was that at the time of No Child Left Behind, at the time we started doing the testing, at the 2004-05 year of the Hurricane Katrina year, if you recall, No Child Left Behind only required you to test in alternating years. So we didn't even have 4 consecutive years. But the court held that they could double the score, count the score twice in the year that we didn't have 4 consecutive years. But anyway, because the law was changed 6 weeks after the hurricane, it took in 27 more schools that were below the state average. And those 27 added to the 80 that were technically failing below 60 gave them gave the state 107 schools and left the local board with 13 that were above the state average. That's how it happened.
Thank you, Barbara. Next question, I guess it can go to anyone. What about using their RSD students' ACT scores, and why can't those scores be used to evaluate what's happening in NOLA public schools?
So they can be. The problem is you run into the fact that it's not required. And so you get self-selection in terms of who's taking the test. And you also have this dropout issue. Like some students would have dropped out even before they got to the ACT. So you can look at it, and the direction is similar. The magnitudes are a little different, but it's another problem with that test.
Oh.
You push back on the NAEP, that's fine. All things being equal, okay, the kids are dropping out, this, that, the other. You're saying that the Education Research Alliance, y'all will have a position, y'all will find, y'all will advise school by y'all. That's it. That's an ACT school. It's pure, it's simple. RSD scores have decreased. Can y'all just say that? Can you just say it was 16.1, 2013, 15 point something, and the scores decreased for those schools?
But I guess the problem with pulling out RSD here is we can't go back to pre-Katrina really on RSD. They only had 3 or 4 schools at that point. So I'm not sure what declined over what period of time. We're always trying to compare before and after to see to make this comparison of the 2 different systems. I don't think you can do that on the RSD specifically.
Yeah.
I'm
Okay.
irritated by the fact that I can't get out of the institutions, the that should have data, right? That's gonna happen.
I agree they should have the data.
Because y'all aren't gonna share it. What I usually say is that you can be honest about
Well,
what you have.
so first of all, I'm not allowed to share it. I can't give a student's data to somebody. I mean, I don't think anybody would want us to do that. No, I can't. It's not, it's not public.
We
I am
thank you
being
for the
hon- I mean,
questions,
I'm being
Tracy. We
completely
thank you
honest.
for the question and clarity. Next question is open to anyone of the panelists. How can we instill values within the current structure that exist? I guess this person's trying to say, insist on job skill training that will reinvest in the community, that are outside a college-bound structure, and possible skills where individuals can earn a living.
Right, that's a good question.
I think the question is kind of centered around, are there skill training schools or models in our system that could be used to help students outside of the college track,
Well, let
like
me
a
just
vocational school?
address that briefly. I know that now here we are 10 years after Katrina. John White, our state superintendent, is talking about this Jump Start initiative. But we have some schools in the city now that are alternative type schools where kids who don't want to be on this college track can kind of choose to go there. Some of them end up there because these charter schools didn't work for them. But I think that it's really going to take the people, the parents, pushing for the types of technical training that we really need and should have had all these years. If you're rebuilding a city, it seems to me you would prioritize a high school focus, especially on the building trades as well as other services that are going to be needed in a city rebuilding itself. But it really is going to have to take parents and community members putting more pressure on the system, as I said earlier, about holding schools accountable, holding the whole system accountable to give us the kinds of schools that we need for our community.
I would also argue, and something that Bose and Gintis stated way back in 1978, that schooling is contradictory in nature. And so what's going on, especially in charter schools in New Orleans, you can say that they are learning the skills to be able to listen, pay attention, and follow rules, not to be owners, not to grow up and want to aspire to something greater and be transformational leaders in society, just to follow instructions.
How I see it, I guess, is that the pendulum swings. 20-some-odd years ago, I was a high school principal in New Orleans, and there were maybe 18 high schools in New Orleans. And I can remember some of my high school principal friends of predominantly black high schools, say, and I had black and white, and we were high school principals together. And the state at that time demanded the college preparatory curriculum. And there were some traditional high schools like Booker T down around the 4th Ward. And Booker T had a great horticulture program, and they had a great tilapia farming program and this or that. And I would, my friends and I, my high school principal friends, we'd say, well, let's keep that. And they'd say, no, Barbara, we got to go. College prep, African Americans, we didn't have a choice to be college prep before. Now colleges are open, and they're open for everybody. And we got to have, chemistry and algebra 2 and calculus. We got to get everybody there. So it was like, if not, then you were always subjugated to these lower paying jobs. And so we all said, yeah, we need to move ahead, no matter how poor or, minority our city was. So that was 25 years ago when I was a high school principal, and the pendulum swings. And now we see where youth who graduate from community colleges with a 2-year degree in applied sciences, technology, earn more money than if you get a 4-year college degree with, general studies or something. And I mean, it's just like in my generation when I was the first one to go to high school. We all needed to go to high school. We wanted high school because we didn't have it. And I think that now we've gone that way, that we need to come back and say, does everybody really want to go to college, or do maybe they don't want to go to college, and maybe there are equal opportunities in a community college or whatever, black or white, that, you can at least come out. And in the meantime, we shut down tilapia farming, home economics, all these other things. And I'm not saying we need to go back, but I'm saying the pendulum swings, and we need to really reassess this now that we have provided those opportunities.
Thank you, Barbara. Looks like we have one more question. Many of the media outlets in major cities are on the decline, meaning they're shutting their doors or they're closing. Are there any media outlets in the city of New Orleans, and I see they're citing here Times-Picayune and The Advocate, that actually, or any other form of medium that seem to portray an honest portrayal of what's actually happening in the city of New Orleans? Have any of you seen any blogs or outlets?
Yeah, Professor Julian Heilig, he has a blog that I actually got my work published on, the narrative of a New Orleans dean, which is called Cloaking in Equity. There's Edu Shyster. I'm not sure if that's how you say that.
Yeah.
I may have said that wrong. And there are a few other blogs. If the person is here who has that question, I can
I think. Yeah. Not,
Okay.
News media outlets.
News.
Yeah. Hmm.
People informed.
Hmm.
We do have. I'm not sure what you call it.
The Tribune,
Tribune and.
Louisiana Weekly.
Well, go
Just me
ahead,
too.
Doug.
I was just gonna say, I mean,
Yeah.
the newspapers are pretty actively cover education.
Yeah,
In fact,
they do.
I've never seen a place that has as much education news
Like
in the
here.
mainstream media as New Orleans. Yeah. Well, there are two main newspapers. There's The Lens, which is an online kind of watchdog
I was about to
group.
say.
There's Louisiana Weekly, which is a local African-American newspaper. So I think there's
I
a fair-
Tribune.
actually want to chime in on
Sorry.
that.
Go ahead.
And having watched how schools were covered pre-Katrina and post-Katrina, I can certainly say that the Times-Picayune has definitely, our regular daily paper, have scaled back the amount of coverage. They used to be on the Orleans Parish School Board like a dog on a bone pre-Katrina. and it's been very different post-Katrina. They have not been as on the Recovery School District as they were on the Orleans Parish School Board. They've really scaled back, and in fact, they've scaled back, period, because they're no longer a daily paper. The New Orleans Advocate, which is a paper that came to town after the Times-Picayune scaled back, does some stories, but they don't cover nearly as much as what was covered pre-Katrina. It really does seem by the major media sources to have been more of a hands-off approach to the coverage of New Orleans. Now, we have the African-American New Orleans Tribune has done a lot more with covering, especially some of the things on the ground from a community perspective, and the Louisiana Weekly. The Lens is an online news organization, and for a while they had been going to every charter school board meeting, which was a really big help. But when I compare pre-Katrina and post-Katrina coverage, even by our major news television news, the differences are stark as far as I'm concerned. It's a different way of covering what's happening in New Orleans public education.
Okay, with that, I certainly want to thank all the panelists, and let's give them another round of applause. I'd like to say, I want to thank Leo and the Albert Schenker Institute and AFT for inviting us here to share our stories and share our experiences with each and every one of you. And we look forward to the next series that I'm sure you will be following up on. And as this experience that we've had is shared across the country, that we would hope, honestly, that the coverage is still there, not just at a local level, but a state level, and certainly at a national level. And so we certainly appreciate the work that the Albert Schenker Institute is doing and AFT is doing to help us with that. So with that, we say thank you, and we hope to be back again.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Larry.
Thank you.
So would you support us?